All right, hello everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me. I'm infamous for having audio problems in my stream, so please let me know. I'll give everyone a minute to kind of gather into the stream. I'll give you guys a little bit of an explanation of what I'm going to be going over. You can all hear me, right? I'll wait for confirmation in the chat before I waste your time. I don't know if you guys can hear me, to be totally honest right now. Should be. I'm seeing audio come through on my end. Should be. I'm seeing... Yeah, I'm even hearing it come through on the stream. Okay, is my chat broken or something? It says there's like 20 of you in here. Somebody say something. Yeah, no, I can hear myself. I'm confused. Is my chat not working? Well, sorry if anyone's actually can hear me right now and they're staring at this screen, watching me do nothing. Okay, whatever. I'm just gonna pretend you guys can hear me. I don't know if my chat's not working or what. So basically what I'm going to be doing is we're going to be listening to an essay from Mark Fisher, and then after the essay I'm going to be giving a short lecture basically on my take on it. Luckily enough, we actually have a recording of Mark Fisher reading this essay, so you guys don't have to listen to me struggle through it. There is a lot going on behind the scenes on my end, and I don't even know if the stream is working properly right now. So hopefully everything is going to go fine. We're going to jump into this. Oh, maybe it's because it's on Top Chat. Maybe if I change that from Top Chat to something else, it'll fix it. Nope. No, it didn't. Okay. Yeah, let's get into it, I guess. And I hope there are everyone can hear me and we're all joining in.
Terminator versus Avatar. Why, political intellectuals, do you incline towards the proletariat? In commiseration for what? I realise that a proletarian would hate you. You have no hatred because you are bourgeois. privileged, smooth skin types, but also because you dare not say that the only important thing that there is to say, that one can enjoy swallowing the shit of capital, its materials, its metal bars, its polystyrene, its books, its sausage patés. The sausage patés are crucial. Swallowing tons of it till you burst. And because instead of saying this, you lean forward and divulge, oh, but that's alienation. It isn't pretty. Hang on, we'll save you from it. We will work to liberate you from this wicked affection for servitude. We will give you dignity. And in this way you situate yourself on the most despicable side, the moralistic side, where you desire that our capitalized desire be totally ignored. You have to tell yourselves how they must suffer to endure that. And of course we suffer, we the capitalized. But this doesn't mean that we don't enjoy, nor that what you think you can offer us as a remedy for what does not disgust us even more. We abhor therapeutics and its Vaseline. We prefer to burst under the quantitative excesses that you judge the most stupid, and don't wait for our spontaneity to rise up in revolt either. In his introduction to his 1994 translation of Lyotard's Libidinal Economy, from which the above extraordinary outburst comes, Ian Hamilton Grant referred to a certain maturity of contemporary wisdom. According to this maturity, Grant observed, Economie libidinale was a minor and short-lived explosion of a somewhat naive anti-philosophical expressionism, an aestheticizing trend hung over from a renewed interest in Nietzsche, prevalent in the late 1960s. Grant groups Lyotard's book with three others, Deleuze and Guattari's Anti-Oedipus, Luce Irigaray's Speculum of the Other Woman, and Baudrillard's Symbolic Exchange and Death, which came out just before it and just after. Libidinal economy has in general drawn little critical response, Grant continued, save losing Lyotard many Marxist friends. Indeed, with a few exceptions, it is now only Lyotard himself who occasionally refers to the book to pour new scorn on it, calling it his evil book, the book that everyone writing and thinking is tempted to do. I mean, this largely remained the case, I think, until Ben's persistence of the negative, which positioned libidinal economy and Anti-Oedipus as part of what he called this accelerationist movement. A couple of quotes from these two texts immediately give the flavour of the accelerationist gambit. From Anti-Oedipus. But which is the revolutionary path? Is there one? To withdraw from the world market, as Samir Amin advised third world countries to do, in a curious revival of the fascist economic solution? Or might it be to go in the other direction, to go further still, that is, in the movement of the market, decoding and deterritorialization? For perhaps the flows are not yet deterritorialized enough, not decoded enough, from the viewpoint of a theory and a practice of a highly schizophrenic character. Not to withdraw from the process, but to go further, to accelerate the process, as Nietzsche put it. In this manner, the truth is that we haven't seen anything yet. And from Libidinal Economy, the one passage from the text that sort of was remembered in the intervening periods, if only for its notoriety. The English unemployed did not have to become workers to survive. They, hang on tight and spit on me, enjoyed the hysterical, masochistic, whatever exhaustion it was, of hanging on in the mines, in the foundries, in the factories, in hell. They enjoyed it. Enjoyed the mad destruction of their organic body, which was indeed imposed upon them. They enjoyed the decomposition of their personal identity, the identity that the peasant tradition had constructed for them. Enjoyed the dissolutions of their families and villages, and enjoyed the new monstrous anonymity of the suburbs and the pubs in morning and evening. Well, spit on Lyotard he certainly did, but in what does the alleged scandalous nature of this passage reside? Hands up who wants to give up their anonymous suburbs and pubs and return to the organic mud of the peasantry. Hands up, that is to say, all those who really want to return to pre-capitalist territorialities, friends and villages. Hands up, furthermore, those who really believe that these desires for restored so-called organic wholeness are extrinsic to late capitalist culture rather than fully incorporated components of its libidinal infrastructure. Hollywood itself tells us that we may appear to be always on techno-addicts, hooked on cyberspace, but inside our true selves, we are primitives organically linked to the mother planet and victimized by the military-industrial complex. This is the story of Avatar, which is significant because it highlights the disavowal that is constitutive of late capitalist subjectivity, even as it shows how this disavowal is undercut. We can only play at being inner primitives by virtue of the very cinematic proto-VR technology whose very existence presupposes the destruction of the organic idyll of Pandora. And if there is no desire to go back except as a cheap Hollywood holiday in other people's misery, if, as Lyotard argues, there are no primitive societies, yes, the Terminator was there from the start, distributing microchips to accelerate its event. If it isn't all of this, then the only direction forward through the shit of capital, metal bars, polystyrene, sausage pates, and cyberspace matrix. So briefly, I just want to make three claims that I can't really defend, but maybe we'll get into in the discussion. One, everyone's an accelerationist, really. Two, accelerationism has never really happened as a political position. Three, Marxism is nothing if it is not accelerationist. Of the texts, the 70s text that Grant mentions in his sort of roundup, libidinal economy was in some respects the most crucial link, if in a way more subterranean, with the 90s UK cyber theory. It wasn't just the content, but the intemperate tone of libidinal economy, which is significant here. Here we might recall Zizek's remarks on Nietzsche. The level of content, Nietzsche's philosophy is now eminently assimilable, but it's the style, the invective, of which we cannot imagine a contemporary equivalent, at least not one that is solemnly debated in the academy. Both Ian Grant and Ben follow Lyotard in describing libidinal economy as a work of affirmation, but rather like Nietzsche's texts, libidinal economy habitually defers its moments of affirmation, engaging for much of the text in a series of ostensibly parenthetical hatreds. Yeah, he's always going to get to his moments of affirming, but actually he's going to hate something first. And actually what I'm saying, the hatred is the interesting thing about it. The affirmation is boring. Well, Anti-Oedipus remains in many ways a text of the late 60s. Libidinal economy anticipates the punk 70s and draws upon the 60s that punk retrospectively projected. And not far beneath Lyotard's desire-drunk yes lies the no of hatred, anger and frustration. No satisfaction, no fun, no future. It is these resources of negativity that I believe the left must make contact with again. But I think crucial to that is to really reverse the emphasis that came out of those that 70s moment, where the emphasis seemed to be on politics as a means to greater libidinal intensity. I think the question of libido for politics must now be an instrumental one. What libido is going to, how do we generate the libido that's going to get us towards our political goals, rather than the other way around? If libidinal economy was repudiated, but more often ignored, the 90s theoretical moment to which Grant's own translation contributed has fared even worse. Despite his current reputation as a founder of speculative realism, Grant's incendiary 90s texts, sublime cyborg surgeries suturing Blade Runner with Kant, Marx and Freud, have all but disappeared from circulation. The work of Grant's one-time mentor Nick Land does not even draw derisive comment. Like libidinal economy, it too has drawn little critical response, and Land, to say the least, had no Marxist friends to lose. Hatred for the academic left was in fact one of the libidinal motors of Land's work. And this is a quote from Machinic Desire, which is in the Lebanon collection. Machinic revolution must therefore go in the opposite direction, to socialistic regulation, pressing towards ever more uninhibited marketization of the processes that are tearing down the social field. Still further with the movement of the market of decoding and deterritorialization. And one can never go far enough in the direction of deterritorialization. You haven't seen anything yet. You notice that embedded into that some of the quotes from Anti-Oedipus. Land was our Nietzsche. with the same baiting of the so-called progressive tendencies, the same bizarre mixture of the reactionary and the futuristic, and a writing style that updates 19th century aphorisms into what Kojo Eshan called text at sample velocity. Speed in the abstract and the chemical sense was crucial here. Telegraphic tech punk provocations replacing the conspicuous cogitation of so much post-structuralist continentalism, with its implication that the more laborious and agonised the writing, the more thought that must be going on. Whatever the merits of Land's other theoretical provocations, and I'll suggest there's some really serious problems with it, and I know Ray and Alex will also be looking at some of these problems quite closely. Land's withering assaults on the academic left, or the embourgeoisified state-subsidised grumbling that so often calls itself academic Marxism, remains trenchant. I mean, the unwritten rule of these careerist sandbaggers, to use Graham Harman's wonderful phrase, is that no one seriously expects any renunciation of bourgeois subjectivity to ever happen. No one seriously expects it at all. Past Mello, I've got a career's worth of quibbling critique to get through. So, we see a ruthless protection of petty bourgeois interests dressed up as politics. Instead of this, Land took seriously to the point of psychosis and auto-induced schizophrenia, and that's really true. The Spinoza's Nietzschean Marxist injunction that a theory cannot be serious if it remains at the level of representation. What then is Land's philosophy about? In a nutshell, Deleuze and Guattari's machinic desire remorselessly stripped of all Bergsonian vitalism and made backwards compatible with Freud's death drive and Schopenhauer's will. The Hegelian Marxist motor of history is then transplanted into this pulsional nihilism. The idiot autonomic will, not now idiotically circulating on the spot, but upgraded into a drive, which is guided by a quasi-teleological artificial intelligence attractor that draws terrestrial history over a series of intensive thresholds, which have no eschatological point of consummation, and which reach empirical termination only contingently if and when its material substrate burns out. Hegelo-Marxist historical materialism inverted, capital not ultimately be unmasked and as exploited labour power, rather humans are the meat puppet of capital, the identities and self-understanding simulations which can ultimately be sloughed off. And two more text samples establish this narrative. From Meltdown first, emergent planetary commercium trashes the Holy Roman Empire, the Napoleonic continental system, the Second and Third Reich, and the Soviet International, cranking up world disorder through compressing phases. Deregulation in the state, arms race each other into cyberspace. Second quote from Circuitries. It is ceasing to be a matter of how we think about techniques only because techniques is increasingly thinking about itself. It might still be a few decades before artificial intelligence surpasses the horizon of biological ones, but it's utterly superstitious to imagine that the human dominion of terrestrial culture is still marked in centuries, let alone in some metaphysical perpetuity. The high road to thinking no longer passes through a deepening of human cognition, but rather through a becoming inhuman of cognition, a migration of cognition out into the emerging planetary technoscience reservoir, into dehumanized landscapes and emptied spaces where human culture will be dissolved. You might notice that some of the pre-echoes of speculative realism. And this is quite deliberately theory as cyberpunk fiction. Deleuze-Guattari's concept of capitalism as the virtual, unnameable thing that haunts all previous social formations, pulp-welded to the time-bending of the Terminator films. What happens to humanity, land rights, and machinic desire, as the history of capitalism, what appears to humanity as the history of capitalism is an invasion from the future by an artificial intelligence space that must assemble itself entirely from its enemy's resources. Capital as mega death drive as Terminator. That which can't be bargained with, can't be reasoned with, doesn't show pity or remorse or fear, and absolutely will not stop, ever. Land's piratings of Terminator, Blade Runner, and the Predator films made his text part of a kind of convergent tendency, an accelerationist 90s cyberculture in which digital sonic production disclosed an inhuman future that was to be relished rather than abominated. Land's machinic theory poetry paralleled the digital intensities of 90s jungle, techno, and doomcore. which sampled from exactly the same cinematic sources, and also anticipated impending human extinction becoming accessible as a dance floor. What has this to do with the left? Well, for one thing, land, I argue, is the kind of antagonist the left needs. If land cyberfuturism can seem out of date, it's only in the same sense that all the jungle and techno are out of date, not because they've been superseded by new futurisms, but because the future as such has succumbed to retrospection. The actual near future wasn't about capital stripping off its latex mask, revealing the machine death's head beneath. It was just the opposite. New sincerity, Apple computers advertised by kitschy cutesy pop. And this failure to foresee the extent to which pastiche recapitulation and a hyper-Oedipalized neurotic individualism would become the dominant cultural tendencies of the last decade is not a contingent error, I would argue. It points to a fundamental misjudgment about the dynamics of capitalism and its relationship to culture. While Land's cyber-Gothic remix of Deleuze and Guattari is in many ways superior to the original, its deviation from their understanding of capitalism is fatal. Land collapses capitalism into what Deleuze and Guattari call schizophrenia, thus losing their most crucial insight into the way that capitalism operates by simultaneous processes of deterritorialization and immediate compensatory reterritorialization. So therefore, capital's human face is not something that it can eventually set aside, an optional component or sheath cocoon with which it can ultimately dispense. The abstract processes of decoding that capitalism sets off must be contained by improvised archaisms, lest capitalism cease being capitalism. Similarly, markets may or may not be the self-organizing meshworks described by Fernand Braudel and Manuel de Landa. But what is certain is that capitalism is an anti-market, dominated by quasi-monopolies such as Microsoft and Walmart. Bill Gates promises business at the speed of thought, but what capitalism delivers is thought at the speed of business. A simulation of innovation and newness covering over inertia and stasis. It's for just these reasons that accelerationism can function as an anti-capitalist strategy. Not the only anti-capitalist strategy. Other anti-capitalist strategies are available, as it were, but a strategy that must be part of any political program that calls itself Marxist. And here's where I sort of disagree with some of Ben's construing of accelerationism. The fact that capitalism tends towards stagflation, that growth is in many respects illusory, is all the more reason that accelerationism can function in what Alex Williams characterized as a terroristic way. What we're not talking about here is the kind of intensification of exploitation that a knee-jerk socialist humanism might imagine when the spectrum of accelerationism is invoked. As Lyotard suggests, the left subsiding into a moral critique of capitalism is a hopeless betrayal of the anti-identitarian futurism which Marxism must stand for if it is to mean anything at all. What we need is Frederick Jameson, the author of Walmart as Utopia, and a kind of nuanced accelerationist, I would argue, argues, is that we need a new kind of beyond good and evil. And this, Jameson writes, is to be found in none other than the Communist Manifesto. The manifesto, Jameson argues, proposes to see capitalism as the most productive moment of history and the most destructive at the same time, and issues the imperative to think good and evil simultaneously, as inseparable and inextricable dimensions of the same present of time. This is then a more productive way of transcending good and evil than the cynicism and lawlessness which so many readers attribute to the Nietzschean program. Capitalism has abandoned the future because it can't deliver it. Nevertheless, if the left is continually locked into a tendency towards Canutism, towards a rhetoric of resistance and obstruction, this colludes with capital's anti-meta-narrative that it is the only story left standing. It's time to leave behind the logics of failed revolts and think ahead again.
Okay. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on with the chat, you guys. It's like frozen on my end. I'm trying desperately. You probably saw my mouse moving around a lot to get that fixed, but yeah, at the moment, still troubleshooting that. So that was Terminator versus Avatar. I think it's possibly one of the most useful, critiques of Landian accelerationism we have, in the sense that it's not only to the point, right? Like, he actually understands what's at stake and the Nick Land's actual project, but he manages to actually sum it up in a way that's understandable, that's digestible. It's not loaded with crazy terminology and stuff. So I have some slides. I'm just going to give a short little lecture here on, just sort of my takes on it and a little bit more explanations. I was going to say that I would be answering your questions as well, but based on the way the chat's going here, can't guarantee that's a thing. I will certainly do my best to try to cycle through the chats and try to find one that isn't frozen and read the questions off there, but no guarantees. Okay, let's get this moved over here. So let's start off with a pretty simple question. Why Terminator? Why Avatar? Why did he choose these two movies to stand as the sort of opposite poles of the accelerationist project as he saw it? Well, let's just start by looking at Terminator. So, Terminator, there's a few kind of main points, I guess, that are easy to pull away from it. It's, as far as the movie goes, the existential threat comes from artificial intelligence. I mean, it's specifically an artificial intelligence, retroactively affecting things from the future. So it lines up really well with kind of Nick Land's take there. But really, the existential threat is something inhuman. It's from artificial intelligence. And the metaphor at hand really is the peeling back of the mask to reveal the inhuman other that was at work all along. The classic, Terminator, when his face, you could see underneath it that it wasn't a human all along. It was actually this inhuman machinic process. And the last kind of point that I think is important is that the world ending, it's some sort of futuristic late capitalist techno-capital apocalypse. I think it's a nuclear apocalypse or something. I'm not the biggest Terminator fan. Anyways, so that's kind of the general shtick I think that we should remember from Terminator here. Now, for Avatar, it's a little bit different. The existential threat comes from humans, not from an AI from the future. In this case, it's that the humans have created their own techno-capital apocalypse on Earth. So the metaphor at hand is the dawning of new identities, literally putting on a mask to reach a higher level of authenticity through, of course, quite literally, an avatar, right? And this, rather than simply being about the late capitalist, techno-capital apocalypse, whatever you want to think about it, however you want to think about it, instead it's an alternate path, sort of an escape from that techno-capital apocalypse by returning to sort of an idyllic, natural wonderland. So this is the quote that Fisher gave. James Cameron's Avatar is significant because it highlights the disavowal that is constitutive of late capitalist subjectivity, even as it shows how this disavowal is undercut. We can only play at being inner primitives by virtue of cinematic proto-VR technology whose very existence presupposes the destruction of the organic idyll of Pandora. So the disavowal of techno-capital, the return to Pandora, the return to a kind of regression back into traditional modes of being, something like that, that itself is a product of techno-capital. Avatar doesn't describe a traditional, simple regression back into nature. We don't just become a more primitive society, as some might think about it. There's a very strange paradox at work in the movie. If you want to go back, the only way to go back is forward. It's actually quite obvious in the film, like when you actually think about it in this way. The evil techno capital that destroys the world, right? That has rendered Earth a dystopia, however you want to imagine it. That technological process is the very necessary factor for the technology to be there in order for you to don the avatar, in order for you to regress back into nature, right? The weird paradox there is he becomes this I forget the main character's name, Jake or something like that. He becomes like the natural organic avatar, Pandorans, whatever. But he's doing so when he's hooked up to a machine, uploading his consciousness into a virtual, like it's not actually and obviously this changes a little bit at the end of the movie. I'm not going to spoil it. I'd be surprised if anyone hasn't seen Avatar, but even just the very fact that they're able to go to Pandora is based on them having giant ships, right, that can transport you across the galaxy. That in itself is only based on the destruction of Earth. It's only possible through this techno-capital horror show that Terminator saw as sort of like the evil, right? Instead it becomes a means to return to nature. Or I guess an easy way to sum it up is Earth needed to burn before we could return to an idyllic sort of form of nature. There wasn't once the process started, there wasn't just a simple regression. We have to literally burn the Earth down in order to find our escape. Okay, so here's another kind of simple question. What movie are we in? Are we in Terminator or are we in Avatar? And this is a quote from Nick Land, from an interview he gave. There was an epoch of deep disillusionment. I'd call it the Facebook era. And obviously, for anyone who's coming in any way out of Deleuze and Guattari, for something called Facebook to be the dominant representative of cyberspace is just almost, a comically horrible thing to happen. So this is an interesting, really interesting take from Nick Land. It kind of opens up the psychological backings towards his shift in thought, right? I think he genuinely did think that capital was going to shed off its face, that we were going to see the inhuman underneath. But that's not what happened. We didn't just slide directly into deterritorialization. Instead, we ended up in the Facebook era, right? So let's take a little look at why the Facebook era was so damaging, or however you want to put it, right? So think about the internet then. The internet in the 90s, right? When Nick Land was writing this stuff. Totally radical potential. People didn't know what the internet was going to end up being. It was deterritorialized. It was bottom up. It was very much based on personal servers, people making their own websites, stuff like that. Corporate influence hadn't really infiltrated it all that much. It was very much anonymous or pseudo-anonymous. There wasn't top-down sort of identities in the way that, say, Facebook presents them today. And there was a lot of fragmentation of communities in that you kind of found your way onto little corners of the internet. It was much more fragmented than it is today. But today, in the post-Facebook world, we all kind of know what the internet's for, right? It's for social media, it's for porn, we know exactly what we're going to get when we go on the internet. A clickbait article is like, it has been territorialized. We now kind of understand what the internet is in a more concrete sense. There is much less undetermined potential on the internet today. And it's very much top down as opposed to bottom up. I mean, it always gets me how, things like Google accounts or Facebook accounts, you can pretty much sign into anything with them. And they have all your info. So you can create these very arboreal kind of structures of accounts where it's all kind of linked to one verified account that they can tie to you, that has all your information, and it tracks your data and location and everything, like the exact opposite of the pseudo-anonymous decentralized sort of 90s internet that people were excited about, right? And so really leads into the main critique sort of against Land, I guess, that's presented here. So to begin, let's just look at how Fisher sums up Nick Land's work. He says, in a nutshell, Deleuze and Guattari's machinic desire, remorselessly stripped of all its Bergsonian vitalism and made backwards compatible with Freud's death drive and Schopenhauer's will. The Hegelian Marxist motor of history is then planted into this pulsional nihilism, the idiotic autonomic will no longer circulating on the spot, but upgraded into a drive, and guided by a quasi-teleological artificial intelligence attractor that draws terrestrial history over a series of intensive thresholds that have no eschatological point of consummation and that reach empirical termination only contingently if and when its material substrate burns out. It took me like 39 minutes of rambling to try to explain Nick Land, and he manages to do it here in one paragraph, so that's kind of frustrating. I really like this idea of pulsional nihilism. Pulsional, I don't even know if I'm saying that right. It's a bit more fitting of a translation, I think, personally, than what's usually translated as drive or instinct from Freud. I think the German is Trieb, something like that. But pulsion, I'd like to think about it like compulsion, right? I think it's the same root there, pulsion. And I think compulsion, the idea of this pulsive nihilism, pulsive forces, is a little bit more accurate than drive or instinct. That is, I guess, not all that important, but it's a good way to put it. One of the reasons this work is so nice, though, is because it uses this to actually form a critique. It doesn't just brush it off, right? While Land's cyber-gothic remix of Deleuze and Guattari is in so many respects superior to the original, his deviation from their understanding of capitalism is fatal. Land collapses capitalism into what Deleuze and Guattari call schizophrenia, thus losing their most crucial insight into the way that capitalism operates via simultaneous processes of deterritorialization and compensatory reterritorialization. So I guess a way to put this is quite literally Nick Land underestimated reterritorialization. He underestimated paranoia, as Deleuze and Guattari called it in Anti-Oedipus. So this is how they put it. This is Deleuze and Guattari. Civilized modern societies are defined by processes of decoding and deterritorialization. But what they deterritorialize with one hand, they reterritorialize with the other. These neo-territorialities are often artificial, residual, archaic, but they are archaisms having a perfectly current function. Our modern way of imbricating or sectioning off, of reintroducing code fragments, resuscitating old codes, inventing pseudo-codes or jargons. So really, is Facebook, in all its territorial horror, is it really as anti-Deleuzian as Nick Land makes it out to be? Well, it's interesting enough, if you look at BuzzFeed's founder, Jonah Peretti, he actually studied Deleuze and Guattari quite closely in university and wrote his PhD on Deleuze and Guattari, specifically the acceleration of capitalism in regards to this function of adopting and discarding new identities in sort of the modern capitalist age. And it's weird that, you know, when you think about BuzzFeed as sort of this clickbaity, constantly just appealing to whatever libidinal drive, you know, will get them clicks, whatever, it is strangely... it may not be a perverse version of it, but it is very Deleuzian in a weird way. In a weird way, Deleuze and Guattari predicted this weird re-territorialized Facebook era, in which paranoia increases in tandem with schizophrenia. So this here, this is the other part of their deterritorialization chart that I showed in the rundown on accelerationism. And we can see pretty clearly here that schizophrenia increases completely linearly with paranoia. There isn't like one increasing over the other. So while capitalism, yes, it does have this strange plusional deterritorializing effect, it also has a compensatory plusional reterritorializing effect, where it schizophrenizes, it paranoiizes. I don't know if that's a term, but I'm sure I can use it. So the idea is, for capitalism to truly be able to pull off that mask, we need to break away from this equal categorization between schizophrenia and paranoia. But as long as paranoia is increasing at the same rate, as Fisher points out here, there can't be a shedding of the mask. There simply can't be. The way capitalism operates is through this compensatory reterritorialization, through archaisms. So it may seem, in a way, like a pretty mild critique, right? It's a pretty middling kind of attack on the whole thing. But at the same time, it's a pretty major correction. Like, Nick Land thought, you look at the meltdown, the dates, right? I don't remember them right off the top of my head, but I mean, the 2000s, the aughts, was when deterritorialization was supposed to be at its height. And what do we see? We see the Facebook era. We see the Facebook, like the complete opposite. And I think that's one of the reasons why Nick Land had his turn, because his sort of predictions didn't quite pan out. And I think Fisher does a really good job of pointing out exactly why they didn't pan out. Because if you actually read Anti-Oedipus a little closer, you'll realize that Nick Land might have gotten a little too excited with privileging deterritorialization. Fisher says that the shit that we're going to go through, it should look like the Facebook era. It should be kitschy and painfully nostalgic, pandering to the lowest common denominators. This is the shit of capital, right? It's not metal-faced death robots. It's the metal bars. It's the polystyrene. It's the sausage pates. Capital doesn't peel its face off. It dulls its face up and it makes a Tinder account. Okay, and last, just to kind of wrap things up at the end, I wanted to look at Fisher's axioms. Fisher presents these three axioms in I use the word axiom in the traditional sense, in the sense of a point that's treated as self-evident, because he doesn't really argue for these necessarily. And maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm just misreading this, but I find I have a hard time pulling out exactly where these points are supported by the entire essay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of give a couple readings for each of the points, because I don't really have the best summation for these. But this is just kind of a little bit of a working out of what I have been thinking about with these points. And what I was going to do is kind of use this as a way to open up questions to the group. I don't know if that's going to work, so we'll go with it anyway. Okay, so point one. Everyone is an accelerationist. Now, I think there's the two ways that I kind of think about this is, first, everyone is an accelerationist because the only way out is through. Or as Leotard would have put it, that there is no primitive societies, right? That we're all sort of on the same track no matter where we are. There isn't really an escape, whatever. Capital is always haunting every society as this sort of virtual, overhanging virtual fact or reality. The other way you could read it, I guess, is everyone is an accelerationist because everyone is complicit in the process. So it isn't simply that there is just some force over your head, over societies, lingering over societies, which haunt them in that way, but that the simple act of human society is inherently accelerationist. Like, we weren't actively, throughout all of history, there really hasn't been a point in time where we have been actively trying to speed up human history. Like, it's a very modern, bizarre sort of idea about history. And yet at the same time, we've done it. Over thousands of years, we have managed to speed up history, right? Like, regardless of whether that's what people were trying to do or not. So there might be a level of just complicity, that everyone's just simply complicit in the process. Accelerationism has never happened. So this is an interesting one. So here's the simple reading, I guess, is acceleration has literally never happened. It's something radically new. It can't simply be reduced to a combination of its parts. It's something that came brand new out of the 90s. Like it's genuinely new. It has a genuinely new element to it, I guess. The other way to read that, I would think, would be that accelerationism has never happened because accelerationism isn't actually a positive process. Like, it isn't actually something to be aimed at necessarily, but it is the process, right? Like, it exists as the negation or lack of its completion. And I think Fisher talks about this a little bit when he talks about the it only kind of there's this quasi-teleological element to it, but it only really reaches consummation when it burns out, when it just completely exhausts all potential. There isn't like a positive goal somewhere to be reached there. It's just this an almost nihilistic ongoing process which ends in burnout or meltdown or whatever you want to say. And last, Marxism is nothing if not accelerationist. I think he says something that accelerationism is a anti-capitalist strategy, a necessary anti-capitalist strategy for Marxism. But it's also interesting that he notes that it isn't the only anti-capitalist strategy, and it's not the only Marxist strategy. So I guess for the way Fisher actually writes about it is it doesn't necessarily sound like Marxism is nothing if not accelerationist, but Marxism necessarily contains accelerationist praxis within it or something like that, right? To say Marxism is nothing if not accelerationist, personally, the way I would read that is to say that Marx's basic metaphysics, right, the historical materialism is accelerationism. The dialectical forces that Marx was attempting to trace are the same deterritorialized forces that Deleuze and Guattari were trying to trace. They may be different as far as, you know, the relations to dialectics goes, to versus deterritorializing, schizophrenization, etc. But I think that that would be the way I would personally read it, and maybe that isn't Fisher's way, but yeah. So those are some just a couple of different ways to read those points, and I don't think I exhausted them at all. I think there are definitely other readings as well. So like, I guess the two readings that I'm presenting here almost are these axioms, are they simply commentaries on functional elements of accelerationism, how they exist, or are they a commentary on the structure of accelerationism itself, like as the underlying metaphysical principles, how it is and will persist? Or to sum it up in a really clear way, is it an ontological description of accelerationism, or is it a metaphysical description of accelerationism? Is it a description of accelerationism as it is, or a description of accelerationism as it must be? I don't think I have a good answer here, and I was going to leave it up to you guys and try to break it off into a nice chat. So let me just check now that I am done the lecture to see how exactly... Okay, so there is some chat coming up here. I don't know if this is all the chat or not, but I'm going to go through here and I'll find some questions. Feel free to throw anything in here if you want. And I might not be able to read them all because some of them might not have shown up. I don't know. It's acting strange. Check this up. All this. I didn't type up the essay. It's Mark Fisher's essay. I just did the slides at the end. I find the Landian acceleration very fascinating, but I also find it really disappointing that he slid in towards NRX, to be honest. Yeah, I think it comes out, my reading is that it comes out of that Facebook era, that big disappointment of capitalism not shedding off its face. And the way he kind of deals with that is just to kind of say, okay, fine. if we're gonna do paranoia, we're gonna do paranoia, you know. And yeah, I have my own critiques of NRX. I don't know if I'm quite have them in a way to express them in a clear way, but I do for sure. All I need to do is switch to live. I did switch to live. I promised you I switched to live. I tried it. This is from Urbanomics hashtag Accelerated Anthology. Yes. Yes, it is. It's from the Accelerated Anthology. Accelerationism isn't a strategy. Well, Marx thought it was. Or at least the accelerationism that Marx suggested was a strategy. And I think that, the Marxist side of it would definitely see it at least having strategic elements to it, to exacerbate contradictions or whatnot. Will this be available as VOD? Yeah, I'll put it up as VOD for sure. Yeah, I don't know, like, because I change it, but it doesn't change, like, you. The chat isn't being directly streamed; it's being linked to the URL, so it's a little more confusing. I don't know what I'm doing. The forums were great. Yeah, like early '90s internet was so different than the internet today. My mom was a she did work with computers, and so I had a computer in my house ever since I could remember, like since I was really really young. I think the first operating system was Windows 98, I guess, maybe earlier, maybe whatever came before that, 95. So yeah, like the internet back then was just completely different. Like it was just a whole other. Oh god, even just like dial up was such a hassle. Oh god. Can you briefly touch on territorialization and deterritorialization as processes? Yeah. If you want a really, like, the deep rundown on it, watch the rundown on accelerationism. I go a little bit deeper there. Basically, they believe in a socius. This is Deleuze and Guattari. So the socius is like a immanent plane, like a Spinozan immanent plane. It's like the very limit of existence or reality, like potential existence. So the idea is the more things you strip away from a body per se, the closer you get towards the body without organs. So the movement from a territorialized body, a body with organs, towards the body without organs, the deterritorialized body. It's basically like just taking things away. Like if you want to think about it quite literally, like it is deterritorializing. That which is the territory on the body is being removed. And the idea is that territory, those organs, sort of direct flows of desire. They kind of guide you in a certain way. And the more of those organs you can remove, the sort of freer you are to move over this immanent plane, the body without organs. So it's about cultivating potential, cultivating like a possibility, something like that. And the idea is that the less organs on the body, the more potential that body has. That's a quick rundown, I guess. Cuck Philosophy did do a good video on BuzzFeed if you wanted to learn more about that. Chat seemed to have caught. Yeah, I'm really glad chat. Like, I haven't touched it. Somehow it figured itself out. Please don't blame me. Marxism is accelerationist because the only way to communism is through capitalism. Yeah, see, I think that there is that inherent sort of... But see, I would see that more as, not as a strategy, but in the inherent structures of the metaphysics in historical materialism. Whereas the way it's suggested by... in the essay, at least, it seems to be hinting towards more of like an actual strategy rather than a description of the metaphysics or whatever. Okay. Capital is like the externalized representation of master-slave game theory relationships. Oh, I have a lot to say about master-slave or like dialectics. I think that people misread that chapter a lot. I don't know. You guys could, if you guys want me to get into master slave and why people don't quite read that chapter properly all the time, I mean, I can do that. But is there a reading where it's a thing that doesn't happen, a thing without praxis? That's a good question. I think praxis is... It's hard to avoid from like, obviously people have to do things for things to happen. But whether that praxis is inherently like accelerationist, like I don't think accelerationist praxis, you know, quote unquote, has really existed ever before this point, and somehow we've managed to come here. So somehow we have had some sort of praxis that has been working, even though it hasn't been like a, maybe praxis is even the wrong word, because it may not be like a, may not be intentional enough to be called praxis. I don't know. It's kind of incidental praxis, I guess. Yeah, and I would agree. Accelerationism isn't a point; it's a process. All virtual sort of things exist in that it can't be an event. It can't be like a specific. He talks about that too with the time and cuts. Like it's not a specific point. It's a symbolic cut. Is it a process or the process? That's a big question. That's a big question. And I guess it is like, do we mean capitalism? Do we mean deterritorialization? Do we mean schizophrenitization? Do we mean the entire sort of compensatory action between the two? Yeah, I don't know. That's a hard question. Please upload the stream. Yeah, the stream is getting uploaded. Don't worry. Yes, that is Terry Davis dancing. I don't know. I just put some GIF down there. Figured it fit pretty nice. Can ACK even be anti-capital? Wasn't the point of ZAC essay that the true ACK doesn't give a shit about humans at all, and almost any other reading starts branching into humanistic ACK? I think it's a good question. It's a good question for a couple of reasons. One, because accelerationism started off with Marx, or at least like the first most basic formulations. So if it starts with Marx, obviously there is an anti-capitalist element to it. Like even if it's just a historical element, you know. But at the same time, like I think the Fisher essay that like the Terminator versus Avatar, it makes a really good point. If capitalism stops being able to provide acceleration, right? If it starts hindering the movement, if we fall into, you know, constant nostalgia, constant monopolies, constant reterritorializing effects that dampen the deterritorializing effects so that the process stops moving as quickly as it did, then yeah, I think it could be anti-capitalist, because it would say that, you know, capitalism is no longer the system which is moving it forward in the most efficient way or the fastest. But I think personally right now, even as somebody who might lean that way, I don't think we have any other strategies other than capitalism to do that. Marxists use capitalist measures and techniques apart from centralized planning. Otherwise, all the capitalist controls are the same. Therefore, it's nothing. It's an interesting take. Oh, by the way, do the VODs go up directly on the channel or elsewhere? They'll be up on the channel. Sometimes they take a little while to render or whatever. And is my paragraph going to show up? Oh yeah, okay, it did show up. I saw it. Sorry, my chat's, it's a very, I don't know what's going on with it. There's also a lot of platiformation of the internet. Yeah, that could be very true. My dad is an architect, so we have a W95 machine. Nice. Yeah, a snowball game. I think I remember that. There was that one where you're skiing down a mountain and you get chased by the abominable snowman. Oh my god, I played a lot of that. Swearing removes you from top chat. Oh, okay. I'm reading off what should be live chat right now. So hopefully, you guys don't have to worry about that. I think that, yeah, it's coming up as... I'm not reading the chat off the screen that you're looking at. I'm reading it off the actual chat right now. I didn't even realize there's a difference in top live. Yeah, the difference between top live, I don't fully understand it either. And it constantly puts you on top, which is really frustrating. Yeah, getting cramped on Earth. He was really... Nick Land did think we were going to escape through cyberspace. Or, like, at least that cyberspace is going to offer not an escape for us, but an escape for territorial, planetary intelligence, something like that. But we got a bit too cramped, I guess. Did you know what the organs without bodies are, Zizek? Yeah. Zizek... people have a lot of qualms with Zizek's critique of Deleuze. I don't think it's as incendiary as a lot of people make it out to be. Deleuze, I honestly think that Zizek, to a certain degree, is like a bit of a crypto-Deleuzian. He actually got his PhD at Paris 8, which was the university that Deleuze taught at. Like, he's a Lacanian. Like, I mean, he's very deeply involved in psychoanalysis and this whole discussion, like, right from beginning to end. And I think his critique isn't as... It's pretty manageable. Obviously, if you're a very strict a very strict Deleuzian, you might not agree with everything, but pretty standard kind of objections that... Yeah, I give it credit. If you leave the house, Chad owns you. Okay, that could be true. Yeah, Zizek wrote a book called Organs Without Bodies. I think that's what he was talking about, which is like a critique of... At one point, Zizek said something like that he really likes Deleuze, that he thinks Deleuze is a good thinker, but that the Capitalism and Schizophrenia series, Anti-Oedipus and A Thousand Plateaus, that if he were in charge, those would be the books he would burn. You know, if he had a cultural revolution, he would burn the Capitalism and Schizophrenia series. So it's not really an attack on Deleuze, right? He actually takes a lot from Deleuze. He takes a lot from the idea of the virtual, for instance. But it's the Capitalism and Schizophrenia series. It's the weird accelerationist, blasphemous Marxism kind of thing that he has some qualms with. But Deleuze for the Desperate is a good series. I would recommend that, absolutely. Okay, I'll answer all the questions and then I'll do my quick little reading of why I think some people get the master-slave thing wrong. Organs Without Bodies is the book. And it's just... I don't think he uses organs without bodies in like a specific sense. I think it's more just like pointing to his weird reversal of... I'm going off on too many tangents. Okay, so Deleuze and Zizek, they both believe that reality doesn't add up, to put it really simply. But Deleuze thinks that there's an excess, that it's a matter of production, that the tally runs over, and Zizek thinks that it's a matter of lack, that the tally runs under. But they both think that is the sort of offset that creates the difference that allows reality to present itself, I guess. They're much closer than people make them out to be. If you actually get into their metaphysics, they are much closer than people make them out to be. Yeah, it's called a Zizek 180. He's good at them. And yeah, I think Zizek, I think he actually didn't mess that up, or either that or he just simply wanted to draw that out of Deleuze more. I think Deleuze and Guattari did use the term organs without bodies before the book was written. Do you think a peak oil is something that invalidates? I don't think it's anything that invalidates accelerationism. I mean, I think in fact it's almost something that, like, if accelerationism is a thing, we're going to do things like run out of resources. Like, it's just... And again, how that's going to be solved, whether it's going to be that we find another source of energy, right? That we start using something other than oil, or whether we start using other technologies like asteroid mining to mine, I don't know, helium out of the solar system. Like, I don't know. But like, I think that accelerationism, it's pretty natural that things like would run out, like oil. We're going towards meltdown, right? And the whole idea of meltdown is that the process just sort of goes until everything has burned itself out. Like nuclear meltdown, quite literally. It's when the containment of the reaction can no longer be withheld, and the nuclear matter all basically melts together into one giant pile of horrifying radioactive mass, and there's nothing you can do at that point other than basically wait it out, wait for the reaction to end. I'm guessing you possibly act as the process or as a character. Um, that's a hard one. I think accelerationism, it might be called the process, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that like the way we have it right now is a 100% accurate description of that process. Like I think the process. No, I would even say no. I'll just go out there and say no. I think the thing about accelerationism is a process that hijacks the other processes in a weird way. Like capital as a force wasn't powerful before 1500, right? It was always there as this sort of virtual potential of intelligence to be unleashed. But for billions of years, like I don't think accelerationism, like capitalism, for billions of years was a non-entity. And it's that weird sort of invasion into history, right? It's that weird like that there is this plusional drive that, unlike gravity, unlike all those other things, it sort of appears historically, imminently. I think that's It's not the process in the sense that it's the only process in the universe. I wouldn't say so. No. Free ski? Yeah, something like that. Free ski. Would it be good or helpful if more people got into exotic philosophical ideas in the sense of our favorite edgy and depressed philosophers? Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of a weird one because I find like, although I'm like I have this channel on accelerationism and I'm always talking about this weird kind of out there exotic philosophical ideas. Like right now on like when I go for walks and stuff, I'm listening to an audiobook of Aristotle's Metaphysics, which is like as boring and dry of a philosophical text as you can get. Like I think that all accelerationism is exotic and edgy, really. There isn't like I don't know, maybe it's a dumb take, but you can get just as much edgy takes out of reading, Plato's Parmenides as you can out of Nick Land. Can we get a series on Land's Bitcoin? Maybe when it's done. It's so over my head right now. Like, I think I'm gonna do a video on Bitcoin first, like just more on Bitcoin as a technology and its relation to things like the Byzantine generals problem. Stuff like that. But as far as like Nick Land's actual book on it, I'm gonna put that off till I understand it a little better, where he's coming from. Why do you think the axe sphere shifted into esoteric aesthetics of edgy quasi-Satanist symbolism? I think about accelerationist theology a lot, and this Nick's edge stuff bothers me, kind of. Yeah, I'm probably one of the least aesthetic figures out there. I mean, I have my moments, but I think that like there's enough to the philosophy. You don't necessarily need to drag stuff in there. But at the same time, it does go pretty well with occultism just in general. So I can see why that gets drawn for sure. Yeah, it started in that sphere. Like the whole idea of like Kabbalah, and not so much Satanism, right? But like Kabbalah and numerology and all that stuff is very, very tightly linked with the early work, or the middle period work, that when Nick Land was really on drugs. You play Satanism in anime. It's not accelerated enough to be the process. Yeah, I think it's in the process of putting more and more like the sort of universal processes or natural quote unquote processes under its own, or to its own use. Like in a weird way, like when you're building a machine, it's kind of what you're doing, right? Like a clock, the pendulum is using, it's taking advantage of the force of gravity and using the force of gravity to its own ends, which would be counting time. Now, obviously, a clock isn't very complex. It's not making any decisions or anything like that. But I mean, I think that's kind of the basic way you should think about capital taking advantage of other drives, right? Where gravity kind of used to be gravity for its own sake, and then kind of gravity became gravity for putting together planets in a very planets and stars, in a very functionalist view of the universe. But then now it's being co-opted for all sorts of bizarre things to do all sorts of weird stuff. So didn't Lance say that Bitcoin started breaking time or something? I don't know if it. See, again, exactly his take on that, I would need to read more, because he seems to be suggesting that Bitcoin, it basically solves the Kantian problem of space-time. And I don't quite understand his argument enough to fully give his argument. But I think that's what he's getting at, is that there are all these problems, like the Byzantines' general problem, and all these sort of classic philosophical issues around time and truth and verification. And Bitcoin is a very material example of a solution of some of these philosophical problems. And I think that's why he's drawn to it. Do you think of the idea that the economic process is largely an extension of oil, and that when it runs out, it won't be able to accelerate? Yeah, I think we'll find another way. Honestly, I think that we could quite feasibly in the next few decades, if we really tried, move on to some sort of alternative systems, be it hydrogen, electricity, nuclear, combinations of all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I don't think oil is the only it's not the only substrate of capital or anything like that. But I do think that I can't think right now. Negrestani's book, Cyclonopedia. There is some really interesting points there about how oil seems to have its own sort of intelligence and stuff like that. And I think there's points to be made there, but I don't think it's the only thing supporting the accelerationist process. Are you a beer man? I'm not, actually. I don't drink very much at all. Fisher called Land a cosmic libertarian because it wasn't about human emancipation so much as emancipation of matter organization. So what do you think left accelerationist would need to be humanist to avoid? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the problems with left accelerationism, is it very, very quickly turns into humanism. I have very little sympathy for the ideas that come out of left accelerationism for stuff like shortening the work week. It just seems so bizarrely off topic. Oh yeah, production is out of control, this blah 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 blah. Therefore we need to grab the reins so we can only work 20 hours a week. It just seems so middling, you're not seeing what's at stake, So I don't think necessarily humanism is a bad idea. We're humans, right? I mean, naturally we're going to be concerned about what happens to us. We're not a robot. We're not an artificial intelligence, whatever. So I don't think humanism is necessarily something that should be abandoned, but when it starts to really get in the way of your analysis of accelerationism, that's a problem. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing about drugs. I've done some psychedelics in my life. I would say that they're a means. You don't need drugs to understand philosophy. It can certainly help, but yeah, no, I'm sure you could get just as much out of meditation if you put enough time into it. Put enough in Catholic prayer. I'm sure you could get the same out of it if you put enough time and effort into it. I think it's more of a means than an end. I think Lance said Bitcoin proved multiple streams of time due to convergence times consensus beyond finite mass. Yeah, I think it's sort of a material form of time. It's a and this is getting into part 3 a little bit, because like Deleuze and Guattari, when they talk about sort of the history of time, or this would just be Deleuze. Sorry, this was in Difference in Repetition. That so like originally there was cosmological time, which was based on space. Like not only space like outer space, but space in like space. That there was a spatial distance that those planets needed to move, and the time that it took for them to do those spatial rotations is what we termed as, like deemed as time, right? And then there was this weird Kantian idea of time that avoided that weird cyclical, like it was no longer related to space, either outer space or metaphysical space. It was now completely disconnected from that. It was its own structure. So, like, I think there were already multiple streams of time coming out of Deleuze, and I think that Bitcoin is like the material version of that, maybe. But well, I'll touch more on that on part 3, I'm sure. Land said in the Hermetics pod that anytime there's a surplus, there's capital, and capital seeks capital, which is an act process. Yeah, that's Nick Land's kind of take on it. And, I mean, obviously, that's quite clearly true. I mean, that's what Marx said, right? MCM repeating. But, yeah, MCM repeating. Like, that's an act process, for sure. But the question is MCM repeating always is that always going to be the most efficient method of advancing history? I guess it's a more meta question you can ask. I don't think the general's problem is philosophical. Oh, really? Okay. I have a different take on that than you, I guess. I mean, it's philosophical in the exact same way, like the ship of Theseus, that's philosophical. I mean, it's quite literally about building a boat, and there's plenty of philosophical things you can draw from it, right? There's a book that relates the history of capitalism with CO2 emissions. Okay. What about capitalism with computation? Capitalism with computation. What do you mean by that? I'm not 100% sure. Bitcoin time is also bound to what we see as actors of the world, including second processors. Right. Yeah. Yeah, and again, like I don't know Nick Land's take on Bitcoin well enough to really get into that. I don't think. I'm gonna wait till his book is finished. I'm gonna read it really carefully, and then, yeah. But at this point, like, it's still in my head. Yeah, sorry. I'll read the questions louder. I'm still not used to this this format. Okay, so I seem to be at the end of the questions. What I'm going to do is. Yeah, that's true. I do. I mumble the questions, but that is 100% my fault. I guess they can go through and follow through the chat. I'm putting extra work on them. Okay, so let me try to give you a really simple rundown on why I think people misread the master-slave dialectic. The master-slave dialectic... Actually, I have the book right inside here. So the master-slave dialectic, most people think about it as a struggle between the master and slave. And they talk a lot about the struggle of life and death and recognition, unequal recognition, which is totally accurate. That's all in there. But what people don't often realize is that it isn't just simply an empty relationship between the master and slave, right? It isn't just simply two consciousnesses interacting with one another in an immediate way. There is a mediation of the object of desire. So what I can try to find here, let's see if I can find something, a good quote. Okay, so this is section 190 from Lordship and Bondage from Phenomenology of Spirit. The Lord is the consciousness that exists for itself, but no longer merely the notion such as consciousness. Rather, it is a consciousness existing for itself, which is mediated with itself through another consciousness, i.e. through a consciousness whose nature it is to be bound up with an existence that is independent, or thinghood in general. The Lord puts himself into relation with both of these moments, to a thing as such, the object of desire, and to the consciousness for which thinghood is the essential characteristic. So, there is a third actor here. There is the master and there is the slave, but there is also the object of desire. And so what the master will basically do once he wins control over the slave through the struggle of life and death, he basically directs the slave to work on the object. And through the labor of the object, right, the bondsman, the slave, finds his own self-consciousness. So it isn't simply through being a slave or being a bondsman that he gains consciousness. It isn't simply through this unequal recognition of subjects. It's through labor with the object, right? And like I would have thought this came out of, before I read Hegel, I would have thought that came out of Marx. That the consciousness of the bondsman, it doesn't come through, relations of people, but through relations of the object and seeing your own power sort of manifested in the thing. And that shows that not only is the thing independent from you, but that you have mastery over it. And a mastery which the master never gets, because the master only deals with it in this mediated way through the other consciousness. So really, like, master-slave, people they talk all the time about master-slave. No one talks about the object of desire. No one talks about the object which labor needs to be put into in order for the consciousness to develop. So I think that's one of the reasons why the master-slave, it's something that personally I thought I understood it until I read the chapter, and now I almost fundamentally disagree with every reading of master-slave I've read so far. So I don't know. Hegel's one of those really, really, really weird ones where it seems like if you don't have your own personal interpretation of it, you don't really get it. Like you can't understand Hegel if you understand Hegel through somebody else, because everyone else is you just end up understanding their interpretation. So anyways, that was my little rant on master slave and why it's a little more confusing, and also why it might play into act a little bit better than some people might think, because it isn't simply just this empty relationship between two consciousnesses or immediate relationship between two consciousnesses, but a relationship between consciousnesses which is necessarily mediated by this object of desire, a libidinal object. How did you first get into philosophy? And what did you attach yourself to before ACK? I always kind of liked philosophy, but I didn't really know that I liked philosophy, I guess. So when I went into university, I ended up doing a major in political studies and a minor in philosophy. I did the political studies because I figured it would be like good to, like it would offer me a lot more jobs than the philosophy would. But then I ended up being like just so much more drawn to the philosophy that I ended up switching into a double major. So it was really just like, in fact, I even remember going into the first philosophy class. It wasn't technically a philosophy class, but we were sitting down and we were reading Plato, and we read the Symposium. And I remember reading Plato and getting, to the point of, I forget which character in that dialogue starts defending like boy love and like why you should be able to have sex with little boys. I remember thinking, like, why in the fuck did I choose philosophy? This was an awful choice. Like, what did I get myself into? And then, then by the time I made it to Kant, I realized, like, oh yeah, this is what I want. This is the good stuff. Okay, so if anyone has any more questions, I don't know, you could have questions, you could be sending them to me right now, and I just can't see them. I don't know. If anyone has any more questions, feel free to send them over. If not, I guess we'll be wrapping this up. Thank you all for joining me here. I'll be doing more of these. I'll probably be doing at least another 2, maybe more. I'll try to do them once a week. I want to get some content out there for you guys. I mean, hopefully these are a little more structured. Hopefully it's a little better overall to sit through rather than just me reading something. So let me know what you think. Let me know what you want to see in the future. Philosophy went downhill the moment they removed the boy love stuff. Hey, I took it the exact opposite. I was like, why on earth are they talking about this shit? Teleoplexy coming soon. Soon TM. Soon in quotation marks. Soon with several asterisks next to it. Yeah. You pick one course and have the ability to select between related modules within that course. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, here it's pretty much just like a free for all, and then like if you want to choose a program, you basically just have to like qualify for all the courses. So as long as you take all the right courses, you can qualify for the program. Yeah, shout out to Cute Numina. Cute Numina's been shilling my stuff on Twitter. Respect that. I'm really appreciative if you guys share my stuff or anything like that. I mean, I'm always just surprised people care about it, right? Enough to actually sit down and listen to me rant for however long this stream's been going on. Let's see. Oh my god, an hour and a half. So yeah, thanks guys. I will be back hopefully in a week or so to read another, do another lecture on Fisher. Try to iron out the chat problems, whatever the hell chat problems I was having today. And we'll see you all then. Thanks so much.